Hello everyone, my name is Michelle. I hope you're doing well and welcome to episode 12 of Crime Story Sunday. Now, over the last few weeks we've discussed some of the most disturbing and gruesome cases that true crime has to offer. So I want to change the tempo a little bit this week, and I'm not talking about serial killers, I'm not talking about family murderers or family abusers. I'm talking about a disturbing case, but it's disturbing for completely different reasons. And this is a story of 6-year-old Dennis Martin, who went camping in the Great Smoky Mountains with his family. Literally, 1 second he was there and the next he wasn't. Such an alarming story about just how quickly a kid can disappear amidst a family outing. A kid can literally just disappear and never be seen again. And all those years later, this is still one of Tennessee's greatest disappearance mysteries. In this episode, we're going to discuss Dennis's story, the theories of what might have happened to Dennis that fateful day, and the lessons that have been learnt since that I think have helped save other children, other lost souls who are lost in the wilderness. This is Dennis's story. Dennis Lloyd Martin, known as Denny to his friends and family, was born on June the 20th, 1962. He was a boy with curly brown hair and a happy smile. Less than a week shy of his 7th birthday, Denny was so proud to be considered grown up enough to go on his first ever camping trip. The Martin family were from Knoxville, Tennessee, and they'd had a long established tradition of the male members of the family taking a camping trip to the nearby Great Smoky Mountains National Park to celebrate Father's Day. And like I said, this year was the first year that Denny was considered old enough to join them. So Bill, Denny's dad, worked as an architect in Knoxville. His grandfather Clyde was there as well, and Dennis's 9-year-old older brother Doug. The group had spent the night with Dr. Carter Martin of Huntsville, Alabama, and his 2 sons, and they'd hiked to Russell Field, where they camped overnight. The following morning, they set off for Spence Field, a highland meadow and popular camping spot. And this was quite close to the world-famous Appalachian Trail. So this was the 14th of June. 14th of June, 1969. Around 3 p.m, the grown-ups watched Dennis, Doug, and Carter Martin's sons huddle up as if they were planning something, you know, as little kids do. They were planning something. They looked over at the adults, and the adults knew that something was going to happen. They were going to spring a surprise. They were going to play a prank. The grown-ups knew the children were planning to circle around and startle them, and readied themselves to, feign surprise. Doug and the Alabama Martin kids went one way, and Denny went in another direction on his own. And this was the fateful decision that little Denny made, was just to go off on his own for that minute, 2 minutes. So when the first 3 kids turned up, Doug and Carter's children, they thought Dennis went the other way. Dennis was trying to be extra specially clever, I guess. He'd gone the other way. So, he's only got little legs. He's the youngest of the group. And it's going to take him another minute or 2 to get there. So they didn't think anything of it at first. But then it was less than 5 minutes when the adults thought, hold on, we better go and just check that he's not fallen over and hurt himself or, something like that, or he's got lost. And they split up and they just retraced where Dennis went. Dennis was wearing a bright red t-shirt, so he should have been really easy to spot amongst all the foliage. So although it was dense, Dennis was wearing something that would stand out. It wasn't camouflaged in any way. And they couldn't see him. At first, they weren't especially concerned. You kind of think maybe Dennis is a bit too young to realise that there's dangers out there, perhaps. He's excited to be on his first camping trip. He's just wandered a little bit further than they expected, and they just continued to search. But as time went on, Dennis was nowhere in sight. Nowhere. Bill, Dennis's dad, became frantic. He ran 2 miles up and down the trail where they'd been, where he thought Dennis had gone, shouting, "Dennis, Dennis, Dennis, Dennis," getting more and more desperate before returning to camp. Grandfather Clyde then hiked out of camp to raise the alarm, arriving at Cades Cove, kind of like the base camp where they started, the ranger station, around 8:30 p.m. This was summer, but it was dark by this time. It was treacherous, and it was the days before things like, heat-seeking, technology, before drones could go out overnight. This was all manpower, and an extensive search was launched with National Park Service personnel. The National Guard troops arrived, Green Berets. There was 1,400 searchers out there looking for Dennis. It was the biggest search that had ever been initiated at that time in the Great Smoky Mountains. And there was no sign. He had just gone. He had just vanished. The search was later criticised for its sheer scale and the amount of people who were allowed to tramp over potential evidence, but we'll get to that in a little while. A $5,000 reward was offered by the family, and that turned up a number of calls, a number of sightings, it turned up tips, but nothing ever led to a breakthrough. The case still haunts one of the searchers who was there, someone called Dwight McCarter, who is now a retired Park Service Ranger, but he was a young man, a very young man at the time. The Dennis Martin case is very, very close to his heart still. So using McCarter's expertise as kind of a baseline, let's consider the 3 main theories that have been put out there as to what could possibly have happened to 6-year-old Dennis Martin. Probably the simplest explanation is that he became disoriented and he just perished somewhere in the rugged terrain. As I said, it was the days before heat-seeking technology. If he'd fallen down a ravine, and despite him wearing the bright red t-shirt, for whatever reason, they just couldn't see him. They couldn't find him. The second is that he was the victim of an animal attack. And the third, that he was abducted, that he was taken by a human predator. Most people who've researched this case believe the first theory, that he just became disoriented and somewhere he's just perished, and they just didn't find him. They just did not find him, despite all of those people out searching for all of those weeks. They did an experiment. A 48-inch tall boy piece of furniture can easily elude detection in rugged mountain terrain, especially in the thickness of that foliage as it was at the time in June. Some of that foliage was at its height. Now, Dwight McCarter said that that's the most likely explanation. It's terrible to think, because he was one of the searchers, but still, you've got to face facts. Now, of an animal attack, he says, well, it's possible, although bears that were known to frequent that area don't normally attack people, but the normal food sources at that time were greatly diminished. And just right near Spence Field, about 2 weeks before Dennis disappeared, MacArthur had said that rangers had released a bony, scrawny bear that had been caught in a wild boar trap that had been baited with corn, something that bears don't normally eat. So there were hungry bears out there that, despite them, not normally attacking humans, if they're desperate, possible. But again, where was his body? Why were there no signs of blood? And bears don't eat clothes. So there's issues with that theory as well. But like the possibility that he just lay down and perished, if an animal had attacked him and they weren't able to find any sign, perhaps it's because the signs were there, they just weren't seen. But this is the alarming kind of thing, really. That afternoon, someone called Harold Key was near Rowan's Creek in the Sea Branch area, so not too far away apparently, when he heard an enormous, sickening, animalistic scream. A few minutes later, he noticed a rough-looking man moving stealthily in the woods. He went to investigate but couldn't see anything, didn't hear anything further. And this witness said that he thought this rough-looking man might have been a moonshiner. But as he was hiking and he'd been, out of contact of a camp for a few days, it was several days before this was reported in. So this rough-looking man was long gone. The FBI concluded that this particular line of inquiry didn't have enough kind of evidence behind it. And the FBI concluded that the scream theory was unfounded. So we don't know. The most likely explanation is that Dennis got injured in some way, but he was literally just around the corner. He'd literally just left. How could a little boy disappear so quickly without them knowing what ravine was there close by? How far can a little kid go in a couple of minutes? Even if he's excited, even if he's wandered off, he's become disoriented. How far can a little kid go that quickly? But there have been criticisms of the search that I think have been learning points for searches in area where terrain is really rough. Too many cooks really can spoil the broth. So as darkness fell on that very first day of the 14th of June, thunder and lightning had filled the skies, and 2.5 inches of rain fell in that first day. It rained again a few days later on June the 17th, and then early in the second week of the search, a further 3 inches fell. This was a really rainy summer. And each storm would have just demolished any potential tracks that Dennis might have left. And just the fact that there was thunder and lightning that first night, which really hampered the searches, not just in terms of visibility, but also sound. That if Dennis had been wandering around kind of lost and shouting and scared, they wouldn't have heard him. And it is known, actually, that some kids, once they become disoriented and frightened, they actually hide from searchers. The main criticism is that there were so many willing volunteers. As I said, at its height, there was 1,400 people out there looking for Dennis. And this included college students, Boy Scouts, hunters, members from 57 rescue squads from 4 different states, military personnel, the Green Berets that I mentioned before, who'd been diverted from a training mission nearby. All of these people across a wide age range, including children who weren't that much older than Dennis, like the Boy Scouts, weren't that much older than Dennis. By the time the search officially ended, the searchers had logged 13,420 man-hours, and helicopters had spent nearly 200 hours in the air. But because there was such a heavy manpower build-up, they didn't fully keep track of who was actually out there at any one time. Because it developed so quickly over that first week, they didn't keep track of who was where. And because there were so many people trudging the same routes, it could have been very easy for trails to have been forgotten about. It could have been easy for trails to have been overdone and some missed, and vital pieces of evidence not logged because of that. They were overlapping and they were probably obliterating clues. Now, bear in mind that there'd been heavy rain as well, so it was muddy. McCarter said, there was just so many footprints. It was just a mass confusion. And this is scary, that several days into the search, 2 men from Townsend who were volunteering noticed a shoe print near West Prong of the Pigeon River. It was the size of a child's Oxford-type shoe. Dennis was wearing Oxford-type shoes. These were the tracks of a child. These were the footprints of a child. But they were dismissed because some of the Boy Scouts who were helping weren't much older than Dennis, who were wearing Oxford-type shoes. So they just put it down to the fact the Boy Scouts had been through. It later came to light that these footprints were from a child who was missing one shoe. So there was footprints from a shoed foot, and then footprints from a bare foot of child's size, approximately the size of Dennis's. These footprints were walking along the banks of a stream, and it suggested that they belonged to Dennis. A missing shoe and a missing sock were found 3 days later. We can all be wise, can't we, in hindsight? But that is scary, how close they came to Dennis. And they dismissed that one vital clue. McCarter said that this lead was not fully followed up because searchers had already been through that area. They weren't clear who'd been where, but they believed that searchers had already been through that area. So if Dennis had been there, they would have seen him. Or would they? McCarter was just 24 years old at the time, and he was still learning, but it has taught him vital lessons. And he says that there's 2 things that he most wished would have happened in the search for Dennis Martin. And that was that they'd believed that those footprints were Dennis's, and that they'd actually concerted searching in that area, not just dismissed it. The other was the scream. He still, to this day, wonders if there was more in that scream. Dismissed by the FBI as unfounded, but still something that McCarter has wondered about. It was dismissed because it was perhaps too far away for Dennis to have wandered. But could it have been possible for a fit, agile man to have carried Dennis? It makes sense that he would have carried Dennis away as quickly as possible, as quietly as possible, and then done heinous things, whatever he planned to do to him, quite a fair way away. But yet the FBI dismissed it as unfounded. The biggest take home, and I think something that search and rescue teams are keen to avoid these days, is overloading a search to conduct grid searches and know exactly who's where, when, and where has been done. And that wasn't done in this case. But I think because it's been such a well-known case, it's taught search and rescue teams probably all over the world some valuable lessons. So in his disappearance, perhaps Dennis has helped save some lives, perhaps. A few years after Dennis was last seen, a man came across the skeletal remains of a small child. The bones included a skull, but were already scattered by animals. But the man kept this secret for years because he'd been illegally hunting ginseng and feared that he'd be prosecuted. Anyway, in 1985, he contacted MacArthur, who he knew personally, and told him about the skeleton. MacArthur and 30 volunteer rescue squadsmen from Swain County, North Carolina, searched the area, but found nothing. But, as I said, the size, the scope, the mistakes made in the Dennis Martin search, the mysteries surrounding his disappearance, have taught search and rescue squads all over the world some valuable lessons. And there's a quote here from Deputy Superintendent Kevin Fitzgerald, who had gone on record and said, "It's the old adage of it being better to work smarter, not harder. We learned that flooding an area with huge numbers of people is not the way to go in all cases, because you tend to lose valuable clues and good tracking signs." I don't know, so sad, so sad. You know, there's a case of a little missing 5-year-old in Tennessee, not too far away, only about an hour and a half away from this area, who's been now gone for 7 months, and that's little Summer Wells. And just this week, very close to Knoxville, we've had the disappearance, but the rescue of little Elijah Kensinger, who spent a night out on his own after he went for a little wander in the woods. He went for a walk in the woods with his dog. He got lost, and fortunately he was found. And, you know, the majority of missing children, missing persons in general, are found. They are found one way or another. But there's just some that they touch your heart. They capture your heart. And Summer Wells has done this to so many of us. But back in his time, little Dennis Martin did that to the people who were there. And we can't forget Dennis. We cannot forget Dennis, because inadvertently his disappearance taught searchers so much. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I've been Michelle. I hope you're continuing to enjoy this series. I'll be back next week with episode 13 of Crime Story Sunday. So until then, it's goodbye from Miss Tillington, Miss Cassie Springer, and I'm going to walk up the hill and I'm going to go home. Bye, folks.